You show me a rat that's different from any other rat. I've seen hundreds of vampires.
Cynical old men rediscovering their purpose in life after meeting a youngster similar to them is an anime trope as old as time. But when you've got Jorah Mormont himself voicing said old man, the cool factor simply cannot be denied. In Castlevania Nocturne, we're introduced to the strongest magic user of the Belmont clan, which is a surprise considering Belmonts aren't generally known for their sorcery skills. However, this man has quit the fight against vampires, and now lives in a village, avoiding his family legacy. Castlevania is his story as much as Richter Belmont's, so in this video we'll take a closer look at the entire life of Juste Belmont, from his introduction in the games to his last appearance in the anime, and break down everything that happens. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. He's Alucard in the body of a Belmont. Juste Belmont in Castlevania, Harmony of Dissonance. Juste Belmont's character is introduced in the 2002 Game Boy Advance classic Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, originally titled Concerto of the Midnight Sun. We like the second name better, but hey, who are we to question the marketing geniuses at Konami, right? Coming back to Juste, his first name is cleverly worked into the narrative of Nocturne, because it's French for righteousness, and that's pretty much the theme of the series. It's also set in France, so, you know, Juste being there just makes sense. But in Harmony of Darkness, he isn't hiding from the world in a nameless village. He's a Belmont at the peak of his power, furthering the legacy of his family. At the end of Castlevania II: Simon's Quest, the land that Dracula had cursed upon his downfall 7 years prior during the events of the first Castlevania game was finally lifted. The people who hated the Belmont family for being the root cause of the curse finally changed their opinion of them, and started celebrating them as heroes. Simon established a village at the place where he defeated Dracula in Simon's Quest, and 50 years later, the village became the base of his descendant, Juste. Unlike the rest of his ancestors, Juste was a guy who favored magic over physical fights. It's not like he couldn't go with the vampire killer whip like Simon or Trevor before him, or Leon before them. He just preferred using magic, which made him one of the most powerful wizards since Saifa Belnades, his ancestress. Juste grew up in Simon's village as an introvert with two best friends, Maxim Kischine and Lydie Erlanger. Juste and Maxim were like brothers, and they competed in everything. Theirs was the classic anime rivalry, which had a true sense of brotherhood at its core. In fact, Juste and Maxim were the proud owners of a pair of bracelets that made sure they'd return to each other if they were ever separated. It's one of Juste's most treasured possessions, and you start the game with it already in your inventory. Maxim was one of the rare non-Belmonts in line to inherit the vampire killer, but the test to claim it involved besting Juste in a fight, and that's something Maxim never managed to do. Lydie was their mediator, who would often break up their fights and chastise both of them, which neatly rounds off the trio from this particular era. Juste is Trevor, Lydie is Saifa, and Maxim is supposed to be Alucard. But the Damphir is slumbering in the games at this point, and in the show, he was traveling the world. He met Juste once when he was 14 years old for about 3 days, and that's all he remembers of his dear Uncle Alucard. So Maxim could never take the place of the son of Dracula. But to be honest, he wasn't trying to. His dream was to become the inheritor of the Belmont legacy, and that's where things started to go wrong. After taking his rightful position as the heir of the Belmont legacy, Juste sets out to kill as many monsters and vampires as he could, because Dracula wasn't his family's sole burden. In the time that he was active, Juste had killed well over 1,000 vampires, and that's how we meet him in Harmony of Dissonance, as a seasoned, all-powerful vampire killer. Part of his quest involved locating all the pieces of Dracula's body to prevent someone else from doing what Simon did in Castlevania II. But to become the strongest, Juste neglected his childhood friends, and thereby missed all the obvious signs of jealousy that Maxim harbored towards him. 2 years before the game's storyline, his best friend vanished, claiming that he was going on a training expedition, and when he finally showed up, his condition was troubling to say the least. Maxim was badly wounded and an amnesiac. He claimed that he couldn't remember much of the past 2 years, but he knew that Lydie had been kidnapped, and without Juste, she would probably die. Somehow, he manages to bring him to Dracula's castle, which Juste ends up getting chased into by a giant undead knight. With no choice but to explore the castle and save his old friend, Juste prepares to tackle the levels of the game with his sorcery and his trusty family whip. This is where he distinguishes himself from the rest of his family, because the sheer amount of magical attacks that you can perform with this guy is ridiculous. As you travel through Dracula's castle, you discover different kinds of spell books, which unlock different types of magical abilities. The fire, ice, wind, and bolt books give Juste access to elemental magic, which he can combine with his sub-weapons to deal devastating damage to his enemies. He has access to 7 distinct familiars, with his Ashura familiar giving Netero's Bodhisattva and Megumi's Maharaga a run for their money. He also has several handy magical items, like the Sylph Feather, which allows him to perform a high jump like Alucard from Symphony of the Night. Harmony of Dissonance storyline is like a combination of elements from several other iconic Castlevania games. The developers wanted Alucard, but not Alucard, to be its protagonist, so they gave Juste pretty much all his abilities and his appearance, minus the flying sword. The game's storyline also plays out a lot like Symphony, with elements of Simon's Quest, Lament of Innocence, and Rondo of Blood being sprinkled in for good measure. In Symphony, the main objective is to retrieve Dracula's remains after fighting major bosses and prevent his resurrection. If you follow a certain sequence of events, Alucard will be forced to go through a second, reverse Castle of Dracula, where he will encounter the true final boss of the game, the King of Vampires himself. Well, in Harmony, there are 2 castles as well, because turns out, Maxim isn't exactly who he says he is. During his training expedition, he decided to gather the remains of Dracula's body and perform the ritual Simon Belmont used to beat him for good. He thought that by doing this, he would finally prove his superiority over Juste, but he severely overestimated himself. Dracula's soul was too powerful for him to handle, so when he performed the ritual, it took over his body and created a dark alter ego called Evil Maxim. Evil Maxim is the one who kidnaps Lydie and traps her in Dracula's castle, much like Matthias Cronquist kidnaps Sarah and gives her away to Walter Bernhard, luring Leon Belmont to his castle in the Eternal Night. Death, sensing Dracula's spirit within Maxim, becomes his silent partner, keeping Juste Belmont occupied and guarding Lydie from a rescue attempt, just like he does with Annette in Rondo of Blood. Because Dracula's grasp over Maxim is tenuous at best, the young vampire hunter manages to relocate Lydie to a safe position and seal it with his bracelet, which he gives to Juste at one point during the game. His alter ego was fighting with his true self, causing his amnesia, and based on the choices you make during the game, it can either consume him or be purged from his body. After learning the truth about his friend's split personality, if Juste confronts him in Castle A, then he fights and defeats good and evil Maxim, saving an unconscious Lydie from a terrible fate. The pair depart Dracula's castle and mourn the loss of their friend, as his body dissolves into the night. If he confronts evil Maxim in Castle B, without the bracelets of Brotherhood equipped, he then loses both him and Lydie, who ends up getting bitten by Maxim for blood-juicing purposes. Juste leaves Dracula's crumbling castle in despair, having completed his job, but at a cost that was too high. The best ending of the game, the one that's canon, sees Juste defeat evil Maxim with the bracelets equipped, purge Dracula's spirit from his body, fight the Wraith that is born from his reanimated remains, and rescue both of his friends. Maxim apologizes for his hubris and error, but is worried that Juste doesn't want to tell Lydie she's been bitten. This makes them bicker just like old times, and Lydie breaks them off, reminiscing about home. Seeing as Harmony of Dissonance is the only game where Juste Belmont makes an appearance, that's pretty much it for his game lore. It's implied that Lydie and Juste fall in love and that their union leads to the eventual birth of Richter Belmont, but it isn't clear when that happens in the games. The anime decides to take the premise we've just established for you guys and fill in the gaps wherever they can, while tweaking some details here and there. A grumpy old man with a broken dream. Juste's origins in Castlevania Nocturne. When we meet Juste Belmont in Castlevania Nocturne, he's nothing like the legendary Belmont warrior we just spent 10 minutes talking about. Nocturne is set about 45 years after the events of Harmony of Dissonance, so his white hair isn't a consequence of him being a knockoff of Alucard, it's just old age. Lydie and Maxim existed in the anime as well, but unlike the games, where their ultimate fate depended on Juste's actions, their lives didn't exactly work out so well. Just like Harmony of Darkness, anime Juste was a great magic user as well, the most powerful mage of the Belmont family since Sypha Belnades Belmont. He spent his early years living up to his ancestors' legacy, and fought alongside his friend Maxim and his wife Lydie. But one day he lost them to a particularly ruthless vampire called Lord Ruthven, which ended up instilling this idea that no matter how much he tried, evil always won the day in the end. He held Lydie in his arms as her body went cold, pleading with her to come back to him. Across the hall, Maxim, his friend, lay butchered, and for a while, not quite dead. Juste felt responsible for their deaths, because he was the one who made the call to go after Ruthven, which is why the magic left him. This nihilism and his inability to get past the loss of Maxim and Lydie made him give up the family business, and pass the reins to his daughter, Julia. We say pass, but the truth is, Julia really didn't have a choice. She couldn't sit by and watch her father turn into a reluctant pacifist because he couldn't cope with the truth and sorrow. She'd learned magic from him and her mother, and she inherited the family whip from them as well. Julia told Juste that if he didn't want to come out of retirement, that was fine, because she didn't need his help anyway. She was fully capable of handling herself as a scion of House Belmont, and though he acted as though this didn't really bother him all that much, it made Juste proud and sad at the same time. His daughter had grown into a woman so like him in his youth that he couldn't help being proud of her. But she didn't know the pain of loss just yet, so she didn't understand his despair. Julia ended up taking the Belmont legacy to the New World, where she made a name for herself as the Vampire Killer, while Juste became the town drunk and part-time protector of a tiny place in France. He would defend them from any roaming vampires stupid enough to challenge him, and this aspect of his character is a lot like Juste Belmont from Castlevania Nocturne of Recollection. In that audio drama, after recovering from the events of Symphony of the Night, Richter quits vampire hunting and retires to the country, because he can't believe he let a dark priest nearly turn him into the next Dracula. It takes a major threat of the lives of his friends, Alucard and Maria, to bring him out of his shell, which is a lot like Juste from the anime. Though he knows that there was nothing he could have done differently to save Lydie and Maxim's lives, he still feels guilty for causing their deaths. And since that fateful day, his magical powers have gone dormant. That doesn't mean he isn't powerful still, because he proves that he can wipe any punk vampire out like clockwork, despite his age, when he unexpectedly reunites with his grandson. While Juste was in France drinking himself into an early grave, Julia was fighting the vampires of America when she came across the Aztec vampire Olrox. Julia had murdered Olrox's partner in accordance with Leon Belmont's vow, which stirred the Aztec's heart toward vengeance. He tracked Julia all the way to Boston, where he prevented her from boarding the ship she was planning to escape to France with. Julia knew it was only a matter of time before the Aztec took his revenge, and though she was prepared to meet death, she wasn't ready to let her son die. Richter was only 10 years old at the time, and Julia would protect him at all costs, no matter who she had to face. Just as she was about to hit the deck and leave Olrox behind, the Aztec ambushed her and engaged her in a fierce battle. Young Richter could only stand there and watch in horror as his mother was overwhelmed by Olrox's dragon form and shocked to death. In her final moments, he told her son that he would kill him one day, but that day wasn't this one. With his vengeance complete, the Aztec took his leave, and this event traumatized Richter so heavily that he, like Juste, lost access to his magic and ran off to Makakul to live with his mom's friend Tara. Tara's daughter Maria became Richter's childhood best friend, and helped him move past a lot of the bad things in his life. But one thing she couldn't remove from his heart was the fear Olrox had ingrained within him. When Richter sees Olrox in France, after having been away from his mother's killer for nearly a decade, he runs out on his friends and abandons the plan to rescue Edward because he's scared shitless. Richter escapes to a tiny village where he planned on drinking his life away, but he didn't even have enough money for a drink and a meal. When he reached the village tavern, a mysterious man paid for his meal, and Richter went to thank him for his kindness, but the old man told him to save it because he wasn't paying for seconds. Just then, a vampire walked into the tavern and challenged Juste to a fight, seeing as he'd promised to kill the vermin if he ever saw him again. Richter prepared to do what he did best and kill the vampire, but when he reached for his whip, it wasn't there. Turns out Juste had stolen it off him, and with a quick two-step, he dispatched the stupid little intruder before finishing his drink. He returned Vampire Killer and remarked that it felt heavier in his old age, and left the tavern without giving him any further explanation. Richter followed him out of the tavern and all the way to his humble little college, questioning his identity all the while, and Juste finally gave up and told him. The revelation that this old man was his grandfather came as a shock to Richter, and he was further stunned by the fact that Tara knew about him. Apparently, he'd been paying her off to raise Richter and keeping an eye on him from a distance, but he never showed himself and he never got directly involved. Richter's shock turned to anger when he realized his granddad could have been there for him all this time, and potentially saved his mother. But when Juste recollected his life story, he realized this was a man without hope. Richter recounted his own life story and the events that had led him to discovering his grandfather's existence by chance, and in doing so, he broke down. Juste was about to reach out to his grandson and comfort him, but he stopped himself short because he didn't deserve that honor. He told Richter that evil will always win. Whatever it is, evil. And it's everywhere. It will always be stronger than them, and you can kill this or that devil, a Lord Ruthven, a Dracula, maybe even an Olrox. But there will always be more, and more will be worse, and they'll murder the people you love. No one around you is safe, because evil will always win. This nihilistic outlook of his is proven correct when his cottage is unexpectedly attacked by a group of vampires tracking his grandson. Earlier in the season, Richter had killed the Marquis of Makakul, who was secretly a vampire along with his wife. The Marquis' wife put a bounty on Richter's head, which a court member called Nikolai was all too eager to collect. He would make Richter's severed head a gift for her and their messiah, Elizabeth Bathory, and for a moment, it looked like he might succeed. While Richter was sitting by the riverbank beside Juste's cottage, Nikolai's vampires captured and chained him. Before engaging Richter in a fight, his initial response was good enough, holding off 4 vampires with nothing but vampire killer at his disposal. But when Richter sees Juste in chains, he loses his concentration and is easily beaten. One of the vampires manages to take his whip away from him and hands it over to Nikolai. With Richter restrained by 2 of the soldiers, Nikolai starts gloating about his victory and tells him that his next targets will be his friends at Makakul. He mentions very minute details about Maria and Tara's lives, which reveals that he knows them intimately. He plans on giving them to Bathory and starts detailing how she's going to slowly torture them to death, a process that might take several days to complete. If they're lucky, she may turn them into vampires, and then she'd have pets to last her an eternity, and he's greatly enjoying verbally tormenting Richter. Nikolai then discards the vampire killer as if it was just a cheap trinket, and proceeds to live up to his promise. Unfortunately for him, the thought of seeing his loved ones suffering unexpectedly reawakens Richter's dormant magical powers, and he easily defeats all of Nikolai's soldiers. Suddenly finding himself alone, Nikolai tries to shoot Richter with his musket, but he misses. He attempts to reload it while Richter menacingly advances toward him. He fires another shot, but this time Richter deflects it with his hand by covering it with ice. Nikolai then attempts to flee, but Juste, who freed him from his bindings in the meantime, trips him up by using the whip and slams him to the ground, leaving him at Richter's mercy. Richter then puts his hand on Nikolai's face and burns him in an explosion of blue magical fire. This scene greatly inspires Juste because he never thought that magic could ever be recovered. When Richter left him, he felt less like a broken old man and more like a Belmont again. His grandson was off to save the lives of the women that was his daughter's friend and his personal confidant, and he can only feel proud of him in that moment. When Richter returned to his grandfather's cottage in Season 2, he had already killed several vampires that tried to eat him during Elizabeth's mini eclipse, and he was feeling pretty good about himself. Juste was surprised to see Alucard accompanying them, and also glad that this time he was old enough to remember meeting his favorite uncle. But because he was a Belmont, he also knew that Alucard never showed up unless the end of the world was approaching, or he had too much free time on his hands. And this was a former kind of situation. Elizabeth Bathory had broken the spirit of his grandson's companions. She'd defeated Richter and Maria, even with their enhanced magical powers, and she made a deal with Tara to spare her daughter's life. Maria was even reeling from the fact that her father, the hypocritical abbot, had just tried sacrificing her, and Tara becoming a vampire for her sake pretty much sealed her descent into darkness. When they escaped Elizabeth's clutches and fled Makakul, her second-in-command Drolta followed them, and she would have killed them had Alucard not shown up in time. He's been tracking the cult of Sekhmet revivalists for 3 years, and he believed he knew their next move. He invited Richter to join him on his journey to stop Elizabeth's complete transformation, but Maria didn't want to come with them. She wanted revenge. She wanted to kill her father for abandoning her and letting her mother be converted into a vampire. She went off with Mizrak to find a solution to the Makakul problem, and Richter was worried that she might end up doing something stupid. He asked his grandfather to protect Maria because she was his best friend, and he really couldn't afford to lose another family member. When he hugged Juste goodbye, the old man felt the ice melt off his cold heart, and he decided to honor his grandson's wishes. Juste took out his old uniform and weapons, and visited his wife's grave to apologize for going back on their deal. He was going to face evil one more time, with their wedding ring on his finger, because this time he believed that evil could lose. His grandson had shown him just how bright a single light could burn in the darkness, and he was intent on preserving that light at the risk of death. Luckily for him, he's Juste effing Belmont, and death is already dead in the anime. Regaining purpose and the greatest 5 Belmonts, Juste in Nocturne Season 2 and beyond. In Season 2 of Nocturne, Juste redeems himself by doing for Maria what he couldn't do for his own daughter. He becomes her protector, her guide, and her moral compass. He guides her away from the darkness that her mother is trying to foster. Before moving out of Makakul and going to keep an eye on Erzsébet's movements, Mariah and Mizrak return to her home so she can get some supplies. She finds Tara instead, and her mother convinces her to join her on her quest to kill the abbot. Mizrak tries stopping Maria from going with Tara, but his hypocritical lifestyle becomes a hindrance in this instance, and she runs away with her mom. Tara teaches Maria how to control her powers in such a way that she couldn't just defend people with them, she could also kill people with them. Maria's light-based summoning circles from the spirit world become black holes, representing the abyss, and from them emerge terrifying creatures like scorpions, wolves, and murders of ravens. Juste interrupts this infernal training session and asks Tara if she wants her child to become a killer, which she retaliates to by trying to feed on him. When she snaps back to her senses and realizes she was about to kill Juste, she apologizes and turns to warn Maria about this new training of theirs. Turns out, it's already way too late, because Maria has summoned a bird and it's flying toward the abbot's church to put a permanent end to his schemes. She was pissed because her dad had effectively tried to kill her mere hours after she learned about his existence. Maria was experiencing a tornado of emotions, and none of them were good news for any living person. Tara had taught her how to harness this darkness to channel her murderous intent, and she fully intended on testing it out on dear old dad, which is when Juste arrived to try and save her soul. The old man was shocked by the scene in front of him, because he'd known children who'd killed their fathers, but never out of a black rage like Maria's. He was stunned in place when she summoned a whole dragon, and all he could do was try to use words and wisdom to dissuade her. Juste's magic hadn't returned to him, so he used Talk no Jutsu to make Maria realize that if she killed her father for vengeance, her heart would change on a fundamental level, and it would be the kind of change that she could not reverse. She acknowledges what he's saying, but she can't help giving in to her despair and anger, so she burns the abbot to a crisp and collapses because of the overwhelming realization of what she'd just done. Both Maria and Juste stare in horror as a shadow swoops over the abbot's charred body and drags it into a portal that looks a lot like Maria's dark summoning magic, but they have bigger problems at hand. The dragon might have gotten Maria her revenge, but now that she was completely deflated from killing her father, it was no longer under her control. Maria started panicking about not being able to send it back, and Juste worried that he wouldn't be able to save her from herself, like he couldn't save his daughter from Olrox. This realization reawakened his powers, and he held off the dragon enough for Tara to arrive and help them drive it back into the abyss. Maria collapsed in Juste's arms, and the old Belmont told her mother she was playing with dark forces by teaching her daughter such dangerous magic. But maybe that was the point. When Maria regained consciousness, she thought she'd feel different, but the pain in her heart just intensified. Mizrak asked her if the abbot met death with pride, but she told him he died a coward. He asked if the devil took his soul to hell, and Juste replied that something took his body away, but he wasn't sure if it was the devil. You can listen to our opinions on that in our Old Man Coyote video, which is up on our channel. But coming back to Juste's life, the killing of the abbot presents a complication. Maria's dejection makes her withdraw from him, and call him out for trying to be her grandfather when he was really Richter's relative. The same Richter who abandoned her and went off to play boyfriend with Annette. She hated the world and everything in it, and most of all, she hated herself because she knew Juste was right. He warned her that there was no coming back from killing one's father, and she wanted the guilt to end. She asked Tara to convert her into a vampire so they could at least be together forever, but Juste stepped in and stopped the vampire from taking another step. He reminded Tara of their friendship, of what Maria really meant to her legacy, and the former speaker realized what she was about to do. She ran away from her daughter because she knew she was losing control, and she needed to get a grip on herself as soon as possible. Maria chased after her, but she eventually tripped and fell, which is when Juste lifted her up and gave her support. She resented him for separating her from her mother for a while, but in the end, she did understand why he was doing what he was doing. Killing people for revenge, becoming a vampire because she couldn't handle the pain, that wasn't like Maria. And with Juste's help, she was able to return to her old self. He was the one who advised her to focus on what makes her magic draw from the power of light when she was trying to disconnect from the abyss, which made her think back to the good old days with Richter and her mom. The massive Fenrir-esque wolf that she'd summoned from the abyss slowly turned into her standard white tiger, and thanks to Juste's encouragement, she regained control over her magic, and was even rewarded with a major upgrade. He knew that the only way to grow as a person was to accept one's pain and progress, instead of running away from it or trying to bury it in the sand of memories. When he accepted the fact that he wanted to protect people from evil once again, his powers returned to him, and he moved past Lydie and Maxim's deaths. Maria became Juste's new purpose in life, and he spends the rest of Nocturne's second season defending her and trading quips with the only other person closer to his age group, Alucard. He plays a crucial role in the final battle with Erzsebet, where his and Richter's magic, combined with Alucard and Maria's attacks, give the vampire messiah and reincarnation of Sekhmet a fair amount of trouble. Though he isn't the one to strike the final blow, Juste is at a point in his life where he doesn't need to be the finisher of a job. He's learned how to trust in the strength of the future generation, and he's just happy that his grandson and his friends are all safe and sound after defeating dangerous and powerful enemies like Erzsebet and Jolta. Juste gives Richter his blessing to go make the new world a better place with his new girlfriend and night creature ally, because he's got a duty of his own now. He's taken to his role of being Maria's guardian rather fondly, and he plans on being by her side no matter what she decides to do with her life. He suggests that they take a beat to rest from the war they'd fought and completely grieve their many losses, but Maria didn't want to waste any time. She was watching the revolutionaries execute Louis the Last and every other conspirator that joined Erzsebet, and she thought to herself that death was what they deserved. She was going to continue being a part of the war effort until liberty, equality, and fraternity reached all parts of France, and in this, she would be joined by Juste and Alucard. The son of Dracula hadn't expected to find a purpose in life that made him stay in one place for more than a few weeks, but fighting alongside the revolutionaries against Erzsebet had made him admire their unyielding spirit. There's also the small matter of the romance that's supposed to blossom between him and Maria, because in the games, that's what ends up happening. In Symphony of the Night, which is set 5 years after the ending of Season 2, Maria and Alucard save Richter from the influence of the Dark Priest Shaft, who was trying to revive Dracula alongside Death. At the end of that game, Maria falls in love with Alucard and goes after him to start a new life and make his humanity resurface. Considering the fact that Juste Belmont is supposed to be long dead by that time, the anime is already destined to take a different direction, and we think it might just turn him into a martyr. Juste is protecting the one person whose powers seem to be connected to hell, and if Old Man Coyote is in fact the devil, then Maria could end up becoming a pawn of evil once again. The ending of Season 2 showed us that the Coyote was the one manipulating Terra into making her daughter do terrible things, so it's quite possible that it will end up kidnapping Maria, and Juste will die trying to save her. Or maybe he'll sacrifice himself to save Richter, if the plot of Symphony is adapted the way it plays out in the game. Either way, it's clear to us that he's being set up for a heroic death, which is just as well, because in the games, he's one of the Great Five Belmonts, whose spirits dwell within the vampire killer. In Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, the Great Five are a part of the ultimate offensive attack that the whip can perform, and Juste is a part of it when the original Castlevania protagonist Christopher isn't. He's also featured in later Castlevania games that twist timelines, like Castlevania Judgment, where he has to defeat the Time Reaper within the context of a one-on-one fighting game. Juste might have only been a part of one game in the grand scheme of things, but his impact on the overall franchise cannot be ignored. We personally can't wait to see how his story unfolds in Season 3, and we hope he gets the badass ending that he deserves, not the cliffhanger ending that the developers gave him because they were looking to make a Belmont version of Alucard. If that was their main goal, they should have just leaned into the Lords of Darkness timeline instead, because at least there, Alucard is an actual Belmont. But that's enough for this rant. Marvelous verdict. We hope that you enjoyed this video about the strongest sorcerer from the Belmont clan, until of course Richter's triple awakening. Let us know about your thoughts on the entire life of Juste Belmont in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Castlevania content. We'll see you guys in the next one. That is, of course, if you guys remember to protect your necks. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.